Hi, I'm Rob from Federal Finance CPE. Today we're launching our Federal Budgetary Accounting Training Series to show how federal funds flow from appropriation all the way to obligation. This is our first training in a journey through federal budgetary accounting. We will build a strong foundation by understanding the basic flow of federal funds from a common situation, starting from appropriations and going all the way through apportionment, allotments, commitments, and obligations. Before diving into complex accounting scenarios, we're going to need to understand the basic building blocks of federal budgetary accounting. How does money get to your agency? What happens before you can spend it? And what budgetary controls are in place? Let's take a look at what we'll cover today. We've organized our journey through budgetary accounting in 4 parts. First, we'll examine appropriations to allotment, how money flows from Congress down to your program level. Next, we'll dive into the USSGL accounts that you're going to encounter. Then we're going to walk through the idea of budgetary control. And finally, we'll have a brief case study showing actual budget documents for NASA's Office of Inspector General. Here's a common flow of federal funding for a very common type of budget authority, an appropriation. This flow has 5 main steps through which federal dollars travel. Let's look at them from top to bottom. The first step is an appropriation. This is Congress saying, here's how much you have for this purpose. Next, we have apportionment, which is the Office of Management and Budget allocating the amounts of funds you have available by program and time periods. Next, we have allotments, which is going to be the agency dividing up the money they have across the different programs and offices. Then you'll have commitment, which is a planning tool used for specific amounts for specific purposes. And finally, you have obligation. You're legally binding the government to pay for something. Now let's look at our first step and accounts, the appropriation. Here's the definition from GAO. Budget authority to incur obligations and make payments from the Treasury for specific purposes. An appropriation act is the most common means of providing appropriations. However, authorizing or other legislation itself may provide appropriation. Now, I want to point out some key things here. 1, it's budget authority. Congress isn't spending the cash. They're giving permission to spend the cash. Next, it's for a specific purpose. Congress identifies what the money is for. Moving down our funding flow, let's look at apportionments. This is where the Office of Management and Budget controls the timing of spending. So what is an apportionment? Well, it's the action by which OMB distributes amounts available for obligation in an appropriation or fund account. An appropriation divides amounts available for obligation by specific time periods, usually quarters, activities, projects, or a combination thereof. It can be divided by time periods, as we mentioned, which is usually quarters. It can also be divided up by the program for the fiscal year, or it can be both. This is where you see your category A and B apportionments on the SF 132, which is an apportionment schedule. Now think why this matters. This is because OMB is managing spending and it's preventing agencies from spending too much, potentially running out of money too early, and then having to slow operations. The last account we're going to cover today is an allotment. And what is an allotment? An authorization by either the agency head or an authorized employee to incur obligations within a specific time. This is where it gets really practical. An allotment is kind of the final distribution of funds before spending can really occur. Up until now, Congress's head said, here's your money, appropriation. Then OMB says, here's how much you can use and when. That's your apportionment. Now your agency leadership is saying, this is how much each program gets, allotments. Well, now let's look at the appropriation accounts you might encounter in the chart of accounts. You'll see here there's a few USSGL accounts for appropriations. And this listing here gives a pretty good example of what the appropriation accounts are. Most commonly, you'll run into 411900, other appropriations realized. Though as you see here, there are a number of different appropriation accounts that are available. And to see the full listing, you would want to refer to the USSGL chart of accounts. Now let's look at the apportionment accounts. Well, here we really only have two. The first one is 445000, which is unapportioned, unexpired authority. And the next is 451000, apportionments. Now here are two things I want to point out. The first one, 445000, this is money you have, but you can't use. It's like a waiting room or for funds. And then 451000, this is money that OMB has released for your agency to use. This is where your agency is able to start planning and start allotting. Now we have the allotment accounts, which is pretty extensive. And here we just have 4610, allotments, realized resources. This represents the spending authority that's been given down to programs. And this is where the rubber meets the road and you're able to start actually planning and ultimately committing and obligating funds. Now let's talk about appropriation to allotment life cycle. So I want you to take a moment and look at these three cups. We have appropriation, followed by apportionment, then allotment. Imagine this is a measuring cup full of water. The appropriation is full of the exact amount Congress has given to us. This is as much as we can use. Now, when we move to the apportionment phase, we've poured some of that water out, right? We've noted that the apportionment has used most of the available appropriation, but maybe not all. And that is kind of signified how OMB doesn't release the full amount potentially every quarter. It might spread it out through the whole year. So then now the next stage after apportionment is allotments. This is where they're able to take the funds that OMB has apportioned and your agency is able to divvy it up and spread it out across your agency for the various projects that you have to support with your funds. Just take note, this is really kind of like a nesting doll of funding. Every cup here is smaller than the one above it. That's because you can never exceed the level above you. For example, allotments cannot exceed apportionments and apportionments cannot exceed appropriation. If you do, you run into an issue called an Anti-Deficiency Act violation, which is a topic for a whole nother discussion. But let me just say it's bad and it is breaking the law. So now let's look at some accounts in action in real world. So here you'll see some excerpts of a public law. This is from a Consolidated Appropriation Act. And I took out here NASA's bit, specifically this paragraph for the Office of Inspector General. As you'll see here, Congress has laid out for the Office of Inspector General over $47 million. But on here they say, of which 500,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2025. So this is an appropriation for 2024. So we can tell already this is a 2-year fund that's available in 2024 and goes all the way until 2025. And it's for NASA and it's for the program of Office of Inspector General. This is your appropriation. This is your budget authority. Now we're going to look at your apportionments. To find the apportionment, you'll need to go to the apportionment schedule. As we mentioned, OMB makes this. So you'll see here on line 1100, I can see the amount apportioned for our fund, which is 500,000. So remember, this was the 2-year of that overall 47 million. We had 500K from 2024 and 2025 for NASA's Inspector General. Now, when I mentioned earlier about Category A, Category B spending, where you divvy up the apportionment by project or time or both. So here we see Category B. This is an apportionment by a project. This project is the Office of Inspector General. It's everything, so there's not really much to see here. But it could have been split up across multiple quarters, or it could have been split up across multiple programs within this overall apportionment. Now, we get to our third step with allotments. Now, it's not going to be as crystal clear as the apportionment schedule, but we can sort of see where we end up. To do this, we use the SF-132, which is a budget execution report. You'll see here we have our NASA account, the Office Inspector General, we have 2024, 2025. For a little sanity check, we see our appropriation. So this is interesting. We see right there. So let's look at this a little deeper. So you'll see here we have our overall, this is our fund, our NASA. We have Office of Inspector General. We have our 2-year fund, 2024, 2025. We start off by reading this. We can actually see our 500K right here in our budget authority, the appropriation. And then we go to our status of budgetary resources. So if you're thinking, where is my apportionment? Where's my allotment? No, it's actually going to be for this particular fund right now. It's in 2201, unobligated balance apportioned available in the current period. Now this is 119,000. Now this report is the SF-132, the budget execution report at the end of the fiscal year of 2024. So this 119K is what is left. What is the ending balance in your allotments? I just want to show you a little deeper to give you an example. When you look up the crosswalks from the TFM, you'll see here we have our 451000 in apportionments, and we have our 461000 in allotments, and even we haven't covered it yet. We have commitments, 4700. This is what makes up that particular line. So while you're not going to be able to get a one-to-one, where are my apportionment, where are my allotments? This is your ending balance for the year. Though an SF-132 is produced monthly, and you can pull it up so you can see as the funding is spent throughout the year where you're at. So with that, I want to say thank you for attending today's training. We're going to have a few more lined up, and hope you attend. And please leave a comment. I would love to hear what you think about this training. Thank you.